Hopefully you found that guided demonstration of an informal letter useful. We're going to now move to a higher level of formality and naturally take it to the semi-formal tone. So let's get started. So let's take a look at this question and we'll read it out together. Your neighbours have recently written to you to complain about the noise from your house or flat. Write a letter to your neighbours. In your letter, explain the reasons for the noise, apologise, describe what action you will take. Again, like last time, we'll think about the planning process. We want to start by identifying the task type, the letter type, and in this case, as we know, this is a semi-formal letter. And we know that because of the recipient to whom we are writing, neighbour, it's not someone very distant from us, both in terms of location, but also in terms of the intimacy of the relationship. So it's very different to writing to a restaurant manager, for example. Your neighbour is somebody who you want to have a good relationship with, but you may be not so close to, particularly if you're new to the area. So a semi-formal approach is appropriate here. And the purpose of the letter is more of an apology. So we'll add that as well. Semi-formal letter, and it's an apology. And then we can move on to the keywords. Now this task is a little bit shorter, as you can see. It's not so much language, but we'll still need to identify some of these keywords. So as we mentioned, neighbours, very important. We want to know the recipient. And again, we've got that recently. That could be quite crucial here. They've recently written to you. So it's not a letter that you are sending out of the blue. They're expecting a response. And they have complained about the noise from your house or flat. So it depends on where you live or where you want to say that you live during this letter response. And for the bullet points, you just want to explain the reasons. Sometimes highlighting these verbs is also very useful. We're not trying to justify the reasons, we're trying to explain them for the noise. And we want to apologise, obviously very important. Nice and simple requirement there. And we want to describe what action will be taken by yourself as well. So very much putting the responsibility on yourself so that you will take. So it's important that we highlight that also. Okay, now we can move into thinking about those bullet points individually and creating a plan here. So we'll think about paragraph 2 to start things up. Explain the reasons for the noise. Now, this could be anything. Obviously, part of the task here is to use your own imagination. And one thing that I can think of that may cause neighbours some distress is if you are doing some building work or if you have somebody doing some building work for you. So maybe there is an extension being constructed. That's what I'm going to think about here. So an extension, and we can pick a particular room, let's say the dining hall, for example. Okay, so that's one idea. It's important that we try and come up with another one. So maybe we explain why this work has created so much noise. So we can think about, using some particular verbs here, drilling, hammering, things like that, very relevant to this particular problem. Now we can move on to paragraph 3. And I want to do something a bit different here. They have the bullet point directive apologise in the middle here, but I think it would actually be more appropriate to apologise at the end of the letter. Remember, we also have that purpose sentence to start the letter, and I would also put an apology in there. So it's like you're bookending the letter. The beginning and the end will contain apologies, whereas the middle part will contain the main content. I think it's better to do this way. Otherwise, you're constantly kind of interrupting yourself to apologize. It sounds a little bit strange. The flow, the progression of the letter isn't so natural, and that may impact the coherence and cohesion score, despite the fact that it's put in this order. Now, bear in mind that just because the order of the bullet points is like this, that does not mean that you have to follow that order in your letter. Usually you will, because it just makes sense, but I don't think this works so well here. But yes, bear that in mind, you can change the order. So we're going to instead describe what action we will take here. One thing that I think I will do is that I will call the builders and ask them to only work during business hours. So work only at business hours, or maybe within would be a better preposition there. Presuming that the neighbours work during business hours. Maybe we know them enough to know that that's when they'll be out the house and they won't be disturbed. And maybe we can give them a little bit more info here. Maybe we can tell them when we're expected to finish. So when we finish within 2 weeks, we hope. And that way, the neighbours will know what to expect coming up. Then we can finish, as I mentioned, with that apology. And because we're finishing with the apology, we don't need to potentially finish with that one single line that we did with the informal letter, but this final paragraph can be the main ending. So we just want to apologize. Tricky thing here is trying to come up with enough content because the directive is so short. It's just apologize. But we will use the language that we know. I'm just going to write apologize here. Maybe we can say something like, show a little bit of remorse as well. Show some genuine remorse. Don't just say sorry, explain how you're sorry. So maybe we can say, a nice use of past modal verb here, should have let you know beforehand. So we should have warned them potentially that we were going to work on this extension before we got started. Maybe we would just want to say at the end as well, hope it doesn't damage relationship. Hope it doesn't damage relationship. I don't want to write too much. Something I've talked about before with planning is try not to spend too much time on it. So quickly get through what you can. You can always shorten words if that helps to speed you up. I'd have preferred a smaller plan here, but I'm trying to explain it to you, so that's why I've gone for something a little bit longer. But anyway, that should be perfectly fine, so we will leave that over in the corner, and we will move on to the letter itself. Let's imagine that I'm going with Dear Mark and Amanda because we have this particular plural here, neighbours. Not your neighbour, but your neighbours. Do look out for those single letters that can make a difference to the task requirements. So we're going to go with Dear Mark and Amanda. And we're going to start with, as I mentioned before, I am writing. I am writing to apologise. We'll keep this nice and simple. As I said earlier, I want the apology at the beginning and at the end. So it contains the letter and it makes a very clear purpose. I'm writing to apologise for the trouble. So this is a nice kind of somewhere between formal and informal. And that's what we're going for with a semi-formal letter. For the trouble I seem to have caused you both, let's say, over the past few weeks. We know it's recently written, so we're kind of referring to that here as well, that we understand that part of the task. I'm writing to apologise for the trouble I seem to have caused you both over the past few weeks. You could even start with something like, I recently received your letter and I am writing to apologise. That's also okay if you would like to do that. Depends on your word count, really. Okay, so very, very clear purpose. The language contains no contractions, but it is also not overly formal. That's the thing. We want to avoid the contractions, which are informal, but you also want to avoid the overly formal language of things like, it is with the deepest regrets that I am writing to you, etc. Somewhere just in the middle. Let's move on to the first main paragraph, the second paragraph, where we explain the reasons for the noise. We'll keep this very simple. The reason for all the noise. Don't always think to yourself, how can I make this super fancy, super advanced? Try to focus first and foremost on delivering the content in a very clear way. So there's no ambiguity. Try to aim for accuracy too. And then just bring in the nicer vocabulary and grammar when the occasion calls for it. So the reason for all the noise you have been hearing, again, notice no contraction, no you've, is due to, so because of is also okay, due to, something a little bit different, is due to an extension which is, so notice we have this defining relative clause over here because we're defining the extension. It's not kind of optional information to add, it's essential to what we're trying to communicate. An extension which is being constructed, and notice the passive voice being used here because we're not technically constructing it ourselves, and it's also a little bit more formal, which is good as well to use a passive voice, in our dining hall. Okay, so that's our one sentence there. We've covered that part, so we can move on now into the second idea that we have mentioned. So we just want to talk about that it's been necessary for these noises, these ones here, to turn up. So this construction, making a clear reference to the earlier part of the sentence, and notice we're showing our word formation abilities, moving from the verb to the noun with the demonstrative pronouns. We'll open it up. This construction has, let's say, required, so instead of needed, required is a little bit more formal, it's appropriate here. The use of much drilling, we'll bring it in here, and hammering. Okay, I want to add a little bit more here, kind of bringing in an apology, but without the word sorry, without the word apology. Again, we don't want to use that too much as we go through it, but I do want to say this. Notice a little comma here because I want to separate this new part of the sentence from the earlier part of the sentence. It's a different thing that I want to communicate. And I regret that this noise has spilled over, notice that slight phrasal verb there, into your home. Okay, so we've got two parts of the sentence separated by the conjunction and a little comma because they're separate parts of the sentence. And I regret that this noise, basically I'm sorry that this noise has spilled over, but we don't want to keep saying sorry and apology and apologize. Okay, next paragraph we're working on the describe what action you will take. Remember, we're changing the order here. And what I want to do here is to mix up the grammar a little bit. So we recently received the letter, and I want to describe what action that I have taken now so that the action that will be taken later can be done. So although I'm moving here into, well, maybe you can tell me yourself, I have called using since. Hopefully you can see that this is the present perfect. Although I'm using the present perfect, it is to talk about what action will be taken in the future. So I have called the builders to ask that they work only within business hours. So that's going to happen in the future. Now that I've called them, this action will be taken in the future. So that definitely covers that requirement. And what have we got here? Finish within 2 weeks. So we'll just explain the extension should be finished. Again, notice the passive voice here. I'm not the one doing the extension. Within the next 2 weeks. Okay, comma, but, again, because I want to separate these two parts of the sentence. But if you experience, I'm just thinking what to write here. Yes, I want to basically explain that if they continue to be disturbed by the noise, then they can definitely get in touch and I'll do what I can. So if you experience any more, what is the noun of disturb? Disturbances. Please don't hesitate. Oh, hold on. I've made a bit of mistake here. What have I done here? Any idea? I've included a contraction where I would not have done anywhere else in the letter. And that's a problem because there's a lack of consistency. I also just generally don't recommend using contractions in semi-formal letters. Keep them for the informal. So please do not hesitate to... Now I think saying something like this is a little bit over formal. Sounds like something that a manager would write to a customer. Please do not hesitate to contact me. Please do not hesitate to contact the store. So we'll change this into something slightly more informal. Please do not hesitate to give me a call. Okay, and also hopefully what you've noticed here is that we're also using another conditional sentence. If this happens, do not hesitate to do this. Okay, useful opportunity to bring in some more grammatical range. Now we can move on to the apology. And we have already apologized once. And I want to refer to that fact by writing again and then a comma. Again and then a comma. It's not patronizing, we're just trying to actually express that we feel that it's necessary to keep repeating ourselves because we feel very bad, we feel very sorry. So we want to write again, and adding the word do really helps to emphasize the verb that follows it. I do apologize, I do regret, I do think, I do believe. It just emphasizes it a bit. So I do apologize for causing you both... Now I've written trouble up here, I don't want to write that again, so let's say so much distress. That's quite a useful one to add here, showing a bit of range in the vocabulary. And I've got should have let you know beforehand. So when we can see that something should have been done differently, but we only see it after the event, we call that hindsight. You may have already heard that word before. So we can just write in hindsight. So if I had the ability in the past to see what would have happened, we would have done something differently. In hindsight, and as I mentioned before, we want to bring in that past modal. So I should have let you know. I should have informed you is also maybe okay, but potentially a little bit too formal. It really depends on the task itself. You really need to be a bit flexible here and trust your instincts. I should have let you know, as I said beforehand, when the extension was due to be built or constructed, be developed, etc., whatever you think is appropriate here, due to be built. Why? Well, so as to. So instead of because then, which sounds a little bit informal, just say so as to, in order to give you sufficient warning. So instead of saying I should have warned you beforehand, we can add a little bit more language here, a little bit fancier, but not too fancy, not too formal. And as I mentioned, I want to just include this part here, and that's, you can either add it, I would leave it in the same paragraph. I think it's better in the same paragraph. It kind of fits the theme of the paragraph, rather than leave it outside of the paragraph in a separate paragraph. But I think either would probably be okay. But we'll write it here. I hope this will not damage our good relationship with one another. Nice and simple there. Okay, but you're ending the letter on a conciliatory, positive note, which is what you really should be intending with an apology letter, showing sincere remorse and hoping that you can patch things up with the other person. Now, as it is a semi-formal letter, just writing best, it's probably not enough, so you just want to add a regards on the end, but it's okay to finish with just your first name. I tend to always go by the name Matt, despite my full name being Matthew. If you feel like it's more appropriate to go for your full name, also okay. It doesn't really matter here. You could even write your full name as well. I wouldn't see that as a problem. But yeah, make sure you add the regards after best. If we have a look at the word count, we can see that we are over, and it's much closer to the minimum here, which is good because it will give us a little bit more time to go back, check for errors, make sure we've addressed all of those task requirements, and just be a bit more confident moving forward into task 2, and also give us a bit more time for task 2 as well. So, although we haven't taken a very in-depth look at semi-formal letters when compared to the formal and informal throughout this course, hopefully this gives you a good idea of why that is, because really it just falls right within the middle of those two poles of the informal and the formal, and it's a case of using your instincts a little bit to work out which kind of language is appropriate for that specific task, for that specific recipient. And hopefully this gives you a little bit more confidence in general with semi-formal letters.